$300 million. Okay, Steve Cohen and New York Mets might not be Dr. Evil, but you get the idea. The New York Mets seem on their way to trying to buy a World Series championship this MLB offseason. And you have to wonder, have Steve Cohen and the New York Mets broken the Major League Baseball financial system? Can small market teams compete with owners that are worth more than $17 billion? Are the New York Mets, the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Dodgers just going to outspend everybody? Well, here I am at 3 Up, 3 Down to break this down for you and give my 5 reasons as to why MLB can fix this system and make it better for everyone. And you may be surprised with some of the ideas I come up with. So you better stick around and enjoy the content. Let's go. You. Yes, you. Are you subscribed to 3 Up, 3 Down? Because statistics say 70% of you watching this channel are not subscribed. So before we go any further, hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell so you know when I upload a new video on 3 Up, 3 Down. Now, back to the content. Just look at these free agent contracts that are handed out in the MLB offseason. Now, it's not uncommon for the first season after a new collective bargaining agreement be made that teams go a little wild because they understand the finances that are going to be impacting them. And the current CBA is going to last through the 2026 MLB season. So we've got an idea what the financial impacts are looking like. But look at some of the numbers and forget some of the numbers. It's more the length of the contract. Players like Aaron Judge, Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, all these players are now signed into their 40s. And look at a guy like Justin Verlander, who's in his 40s, signed by the Mets for 2 years of more than $43 million per season. That is an astronomical number and is almost more than some of the payrolls of some teams on their own. So the question begs, are these contracts breaking the MLB financial system? And can teams compete with owners and teams in markets that can spend more money, like the Yankees, like the Phillies, like the Mets? Are teams able to compete with this? You took a look at these contracts. Really, the only team that did not make the playoffs that has a real big end contract is Carlos Correa going back to the Minnesota Twins. And we understand the circumstances there. Jacob deGrom going to Texas. He's a big piece of them trying to make it back to relevancy. Dansby Swanson with the Cubs was a little bit of a shock there. But when you start to look at it, Dansby Swanson's wife plays soccer in Chicago. So this makes a lot of sense for him as well on a personal level. But all the top end players are being snatched up by teams that believe they are either playoff teams or are right on the cusp of relevancy. So this really makes you think, where are the smaller market teams? Can they compete with this? Well, they aren't signing bigger name players. They aren't making these long-term commitments in dollars. So what are they doing to try to further improve their teams? And in some cases, you have to wonder, are those teams even trying to improve? Are they trying to win in this financial system? And when you start to take a look at the payrolls and the revenue that's being generated and the profit margins that are being made for these MLB teams, it gets very, very interesting. When you start to look at the projected tax payroll of major league teams, the top 10 teams, we're going to go through all 30 in baseball here, but the New York Mets have a projected tax payroll of $357 million. That's nearly $75 million more than the second highest. That is absurd. It absolutely is. But if the Mets are willing to spend in this time of luxury tax, the powers that be can't really stop them. They're just going to spend, spend, spend. The difference is here with the Mets, they're going to have probably the oldest major league roster next season. And we've seen this in the past when the Yankees used to really spend, that this doesn't always lead to winning. In fact, it can lead to crumbling and a lot of aging players getting hurt and you not having a competitive team. The 2022 income, though, look at that. The Mets lost nearly $100 million. So Steve Cohen and company want to go ahead and lose that money. Hey, it's their money to spend. Go for it. Spend all you want, but you're not going to make any money, and you're going to run it as a business as a net loss. Can Steve Cohen afford it? Sure he can, but it's not going to be a picture for long-term success for an organization. You take a look at some of these other teams. The Yankees lost $40 million last year. The Padres lost $32 million. You have to wonder where this is going. The Phillies, who made the World Series, even lost $17 million. So there's a lot of things here in terms of revenue generated and tax payroll. So the projected tax payroll includes taxes that would pay on luxury tax. And we'll talk about that a little bit. The Dodgers lost some money, and there's the staple of all or MLB organizations right now. The consistent winners, the Atlanta Braves, whose projected payroll sits to just under the first luxury tax at $220 million. And last year, they netted an income of $83 million. This is the way you win in Major League Baseball as an ownership and make money. So the ability to stay competitive and make a profit are certainly possible in MLB's finances. What are the Braves doing? I've made a whole video on this. The Braves are playing younger players for longer term, and they're banking on their development system to develop these younger players to be homegrown stars. Austin Riley, Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna Jr. These players have contracts that are undervalued for the market. They're locking them up long term, and they're buying out their pre-arbitration and arbitration years. If you don't understand the contracts, make sure you check out the end of my video. I've got a link that'll take you right to my contracts video to better understand this. The Braves are definitely have the finances in order to make a profit and be a sustainable winner in Major League Baseball. And I think more teams need to start copying this. A couple other teams take note of: the Giants, the Cubs, the Red Sox. These teams are making big time profits, 30, 60, 90 million dollars in profit, and they are trying to win. The problem is with these teams, they don't have the developed talent, that young talent that matches the Braves, and that's where they're struggling. They've had to go through rebuilds. The Cubs are probably further along here. The Red Sox seem to be trying to do it with Chaim Bloom. Marcelo Meyer, a young top prospect for the Red Sox, seems to be the guy they're looking to build around, along with the recently locked up Rafael Devers. You take a look at the Giants, they just don't have that same young talent. They've had an aging roster, and the retirement of Buster Posey really hurt them there. So guys like Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, either making their way out of the organization or have already left. You have to look at Marco Luciano as their next kind of star, hopefully as a shortstop with the Giants, and potentially left-handed pitcher Kyle Harrison. So there's a lot of promise with those teams that are still going to make money right now. They're still trying to win and attract free agents, but it's just not working out and sustain success on the field. When we look at the next batch of teams, we can really see some things that stand out as well. First off, you see now the league average of $165 million in projected tax payroll. That's very interesting when we start to look at some of these organizations. The Texas Rangers had a net income of $97 million in 2022, and we've seen they've gone out and spent it big on Jacob deGrom, big on their pitching staff with Nathan Eovaldi. They've added with John Gray in the past. There's a lot to like what Texas is doing. And you have to remember, a lot of the income coming in Texas, they've just opened that brand new ballpark in Globe Life. So that's where a lot of these earnings are coming from. And they've recently had a newer television deal that come in for a regional television deal that's really helping them as well and create an influx of money. So that's where the Texas money is coming from. And they can start to build a team. They're trying to build a little bit through free agency, not so much like the Braves with young talent, but it's very interesting to see what the profit margin will be for Texas over the next couple of years. If they can win, I'd expect it to stay at least decent. If they don't win, this is going to be a real crash and burn situation for the Rangers. The other team to look at would be Houston Astros. They've been a consistent, dominant team. They're making money. The Astros are another team that very well understand the young player profit margins. They've been very, very successful in building their pitching staff with international signings that have been unheralded when they were made. Framber Valdez, Christian Javier, Luis Garcia, these guys were young international prospects that were signed, but they were a little bit older than most of the guys being signed, and they were signed for very low profit margins on their contracts in terms of a bonus. We're talking $5, $10, $25,000. These were not high-end young guys, but they were developed through the system. Houston saw what they liked, developed them in their system, and they've now made a contribution at Major League level, and they're a huge reason why the Astros have been so consistent over the last few years and are a big chance that they can repeat as champions next season. Take a look at one other team, and that's Seattle. Seattle has a bunch of money available now. We started to see them spend some money, but they have that financial might and power right now that they could go out and sign some big name players. We've seen the long-term deal with Julio Rodriguez. That's a big part of this, and then their financial commitment going forward, which will cut into their profit margin. But it's a very good player to lock up long-term and can give them sustained success for a long time. They have some young players, of course, coming up in the likes of George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, and their pitching staff that they'll also have to lock up long term, and that'll cost them money as well. But they're in a very good financial situation. Overall, these middle-range teams are making a little bit of money or losing a little bit of money. St. Louis is obviously trying to win, although they're not going crazy because they understand their financial situation. Minnesota, Detroit, Milwaukee, these are teams who have been up there in the past, or in the case of Detroit, really starting to hit their stride potentially with some of their younger guys if they can hit with the likes of Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson. So I don't think there's any surprising numbers here in the payrolls of these teams or the incomes. It's when you get to the bottom 10 that things get really interesting. Taking a look at those bottom 10 teams in terms of expected payroll, the first thing you do is look at the profit margins for these teams down in the lower end. The Washington Nationals, one of the worst teams in baseball, made $36 million. The Cleveland Guardians made $71 million. The Diamondbacks at 40, the Marlins, the Rays, the Royals, the Pirates, the Orioles, huge profit margins, and their payrolls are all right around that $100 million or less. So why are these teams not potentially spending? Well, in some cases, like the Nationals, they really need to rebuild their team and just weren't winning with what they had. So they had to rebuild things. And it makes some sense why they've been able to make these kinds of profits and their tax payrolls a little less. But some of these other teams, like a Baltimore, who's right on the cusp of winning and making the playoffs last season, they could have built up things this week. They're trying to do it slowly to build a sustained winner. But there's so much money here that's not being used. And there's revenue being generated for these smaller market teams that these owners, in a lot of cases, are sitting on. I know Bob Nutting and the Pittsburgh Pirates have been known for this for a long time and just creating a profit margin and making huge profits and huge amount of monies and not investing it back in the team. Well, they're not the only ones. Take a look at these numbers. The only two teams that really aren't, the Cincinnati Reds. Well, the Reds basically tore their team down and really affected their margins last year. And when you have an owner basically come out and say they're not going to be any good and you don't really care if anybody comes out to watch you, then that's kind of an issue. The other one is the Oakland situation, and the Oakland situation has been what it is for a long time. They're losing money. The stadium is collapsing. Something needs to be done in Oakland, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But the fact is, these smaller market teams are not reinvesting money into their payroll, into player salary. What they're doing is finding loopholes and putting money into scouting systems, into coaching development, and all these places are really hiding the money and not investing it back into payroll and paying players. And they're not even locking up their players to long-term deals. We saw it a little bit with the Pirates with Ke'Bryan Hayes. I think Cleveland will do it here in a little bit with some of their stars, and they kept Jose Ramirez around and extended him. So there are some plays to be made there. But younger players need to be locked up a la the Atlanta Braves model. We saw it with Tampa Bay as well with Wander Franco. If he can stay healthy, that's going to be a big deal for the Rays moving forward. Hopefully the Royals do it with a player like Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino. Good young players need to be locked up for long term, and these teams can follow that Atlanta Braves model to success. So when you take a look at the CBA and wonder, well, where is this money coming from? And how do we guarantee teams are going to continue to make these profits? A team like the Pirates has been continually making profit after profit year after year. But how are they doing it? Well, they're doing it in the backs of other teams and the current collective bargaining agreement. TV revenue is at a place it's never been seen before. And TV is really all you need to turn a profit in Major League Baseball. The TV contracts from 2022 through 2028 with ESPN and Turner, these are just the national deals. These don't even include the regional ones. These are equal to $60.1 million per year per team. So any team with a payroll that's under $60 million right off the rip, right from national contracts, is going to be making money on player salaries just right there in terms of revenue. Then you get to local television deals. And every team has a local television contract paying at least $40 million to the team. And these numbers are split up in terms of revenue sharing. So even if a team is only making $40 million on their local deal and another is making $120 million, they're still going to receive a portion of that $120 million in terms of revenue sharing. So TV contracts, all total, each team is bringing in approximately $100 million just in TV money. Now, I understand there's all kinds of expenses outside of player salary, but the fact you're bringing in $100 million just in TV deals is a huge reason why teams should be spending more, given the guarantees. These guarantees last through 2028 with the national television deals, and baseball's profit margin and revenue has been going up. In fact, baseball's margins have been over $11 billion in revenue this past season, and that is back above pre-pandemic numbers. So you can't blame COVID and recovering economy with this. There is money in baseball right now. So on top of those national and local television deals, there's also revenue sharing. So on top of this, each team pools 48% of their revenue. This total is split between the 30 teams, with each team receiving approximately 3.3%. That 2022 share was approximately $110 million per team. This is on top of the TV deals. So you include the 100 million in revenue from TV and the 110 million in revenue sharing, we're talking a starting point in revenue of $210 million per team. There is absolutely no reason why these teams need to be sitting on all this money. They can be reinvesting it back into the team if they so choose. The problem is teams are not doing that. They're sitting on these profit margins and making huge amounts of profits, and they're not being forced to invest back into the team in terms of player salary. They're doing it other ways, but not into players. And that's where money needs to start going more in Major League Baseball to make it a more competitive environment. Total revenue per team, of course, for 22 then was a minimum of $210 million. Only 9 teams are expected to have payroll exceeding this in 2023, and 10 teams are expected under $110 million that we saw in those numbers. This is not the way MLB is expecting this to be happening. Agent Scott Boras has come up in the past and saying these teams need to start spending this money in player salary, and he's absolutely right. I don't give Scott Boras a lot of credit very often, but he's right on this one. And yes, I understand he's an agent, is going to make more money off of this. But teams need to start investing their money if you want a competitive environment in Major League Baseball. You take a look at the landscape in baseball right now and say, what non-playoff team is going to make it this year? And it's really tough to try and find one. You really have to squint your eyes and look close, but it may not happen. And if that's not happening, if there's not a change in playoff teams year after year, then something is broken in Major League Baseball, and it's not the New York Mets. So take a look at competitive balance tax penalties. So the following thresholds were put in place for 2022 through 2026 in the collective bargaining agreement. So any team in 2023 season that we're going into, if they spend more than $233 million, they are going to pay a luxury tax. And this tax will escalate if they continue to do this year after year. And this is where the New York Mets are getting in. But we've now seen here, there are no penalties on the lower end for not reinvesting back in your team, but there are penalties in the high end to constrain teams and keep them into check a little bit so that teams can be competitive. But if these smaller market teams are not putting the money back into the team and sitting on profit margins of $30 to $90 million, then we're not going to see a balanced playing field across Major League Baseball. And this is where the problem exists, not at the upper end, but at the lower end, and no penalties existing down there. You take a look, this number will slowly increase as the year goes on. These numbers are per MLB.com. So this is coming right from their glossary. And you start to see the penalties that come into place. A club that exceeds the competitive balance tax threshold is subject to an increasing tax rate depending on how many consecutive years it's done so. So the first year, they're charged 20% tax on all overages. Great. That'll keep them in check a little bit. It does impact some teams because they're worried about the escalation clause, not so much the 1 year and going up and then back under. It's the second and third year where you see the second year paying 30%, the third year consecutively being 50%. If a club dips below the luxury tax threshold, then that penalty level is reset. And we've seen this in the last few years. The Yankees dipped under for a year. The Dodgers seem to be in that place this year before they take a run potentially at players like Shohei Ohtani next offseason. So resetting your tax level is very important for teams at times to keep their finances in check. So a club that exceeds the threshold for 2 straight seasons but then drops below that level would be back at 20% the next time it exceeds the threshold. So dropping from 50% and resetting back to 20% after 1 year underneath can be very, very important for teams, and resetting that and giving themselves some financial flexibility for upcoming seasons. Of course, if you continue to spend, a la Steve Cohen and the New York Mets, you're going to pay more taxes. If you go over 20 million above the threshold, you're going to pay an extra 12% surcharge. If you go 40 to 60 million over, there's more penalties there, 42.5% for the first, 45 after that. And in fact, if you go $60 million over the threshold of 233 this year, which is what the net Mets are now hitting, they're going to pay a 60% surcharge. And clubs that are 40 million or more above the threshold
shall have their highest selection in the next Rule 4 draft move back 10 places unless the pick falls in the top 6. In that case, the team will have its second highest selection move back 10 places. So there's more and more penalties to spending money. But as we've talked about, there's nothing on that lower end to encourage teams to spend money on player salary and increase their payrolls and bring competitive balance to Major League Baseball. Now, I understand just because you spend money does not mean you're going to be guaranteed to have a competitive team. You have to pay your players the proper amount for the proper abilities so you're not overpaying players. But given the fact that the revenue being generated is 210 million per year per team, there needs to be some lower end salary influx. The National Football League has it, the National Basketball Association has it, even the NHL, National Hockey League has it, and it forces teams to pay players and have not a salary cap in this case, but constrain teams into a set area to bring more competitive balance to the league and allow teams to compete year after year and give fan bases hope across Major League Baseball. So, Shane, we just made you Commissioner of Major League Baseball for the day. What are the 5 things that you would do? Well, here, let's take a look at my 5 recommendations to Major League Baseball to bring competitive balance back to the game and to fix the finances. And no, it's not to penalize the New York Mets. Well, maybe a little bit. So first up, the number one situation that has to be taken care of is Oakland. You cannot have the team with the lowest payroll in baseball losing money. So what do you need to do? You need to either come to an agreement in Oakland this season in 2023 for a new stadium, a new outlook for the team, or you have to find a new home. And there's plenty of different cities out there. My personal favorite for Oakland would be a move to Las Vegas and following the Raiders out of Oakland into Las Vegas. It makes the most sense. We've seen minor league baseball happen in Las Vegas in the past. I think it'd be a really good fit. I know they worry about gambling issues, especially in baseball of the past with Pete Rose and all that, but this has become part of the game and a part of all sports. So I really think that this would fit well. Yes, I think they need a dome stadium or something with a roof cover in Las Vegas because of the heat, but this would be a very good fit for the Oakland Athletics. It would allow them to stay in the American League West, and it just makes a lot of financial sense for the game as well. So the situation Oakland has to be dealt with before you can do anything else in terms of overall finances of smaller market teams. Otherwise, you're just going to bury the A's. The number 2 thing I think we need to do to change Major League Baseball is actually to increase the percentages on the luxury tax and ding those high-end teams a little bit more. You say, well, Shane, what's the point of that? We're trying to increase the player money into salaries. These teams are already doing it. Why are we going to penalize them more? Just to constrain them more, to keep teams more in that middle range of salary, to bring more competitive balance to baseball. I would suggest a first year of 35%, the second at 50%, and the third then at 65%, and making those changes to really affect the high end spending teams so that more often they're going to try and reset their tax threshold. I don't think they're high enough right now to really care about the first and even second year. It's that third year escalator that worries them. And if we bring that 50% back from the third year back down to the second year, I think that would affect teams more often. And we look at the offseason this year, it looks to me like there's going to be 6, 7, potentially even 8 teams that are going to go over that first level of luxury tax. Some of them are repeat offenders, some of them are first time offenders. Because there's more teams having the ability to go above that first tax threshold, I think we need to make it a little more punitive and create some more revenue sharing for other teams. Now, with all that being said, and really penalizing the upper end teams for spending, the lower end teams in the market now need to have a minimum payroll on player salary in place. And if you want to include it, we could expand it to be a minimum payroll based on your 40-man roster. And I think this is where MLB needs to go. MLB teams should be required to maintain a minimum player payroll of $100 million for the 2025 season. That would give them the 2023 and 2024 season to sort out their finances, and then they need to have a player salary of $100 million minimum starting in 2025. This would bring competitive balance back to the teams. The lower market teams are no longer then able to sit on these massive profits they're getting through revenue sharing, and it's going to force them to invest back into players, and it's going to increase player salary, and yet it's still going to keep the check because of the higher end tax thresholds, and we're going to bring more competitive balance in terms of salary back to Major League Baseball. How do you penalize these teams? Well, for not hitting that minimum payroll, well, they're going to be really affected by younger players on this. So the failure to not maintain payroll could lead to fines to bring them back to that level, or forfeiture or draft picks and international signing money. Teams that have lower payroll really depend upon these types of outcomes with draft picks and international signing because those numbers are not very high and they do not cost a huge amount compared to their profit margin. So if you take this away from teams not complying with the minimum payroll, now you start to affect them in ways that are going to affect their major league club and they're going to struggle to compete at that level, even though they're trying to game the system and make more money. Number 4 is a smaller one in terms of overall money, but I think it's a very important step that needs to be taken. The minor league systems need to be better taken care of in Major League Baseball. I actually think the minor league player salary needs to be bumped up to a living wage and not this low end, sometimes $4,000, $10,000 salaries that these players are receiving only during the season. But one other thing we can really help with this, and this is my number 4 thing, is to increase draft pick pools. On average, it's 9.3 million. We bump it to 10. It's not a huge thing right now, but I think the ability to spend more money on draft picks would force teams to do more scouting and really take a better idea of the younger players they're trying to draft. And the other thing that needs to be bumped up is the international signing pool. Right now, teams have $4.75 million per year. I'd like to see that increase to $10 million. There's so much talent out there in the international pool in places like the Dominican Republic, Venezuela. We see this with the World Baseball Classic. There's so many young, talented players from around the world that need to be looked at and give those opportunities to hit a higher end on their salary to give them more comfort in their level of lifestyle and to be able to bring them over to the United States and Canada and really allow them to develop their trade at a proper place and facility. And this money would allow players to do this better, and it would allow teams to sign more international players and fill the minor league systems up, not just through the draft, but through international signings. And we've seen how important this can be for teams, especially see it with the Houston Astros, and the ability to pay those players and develop them would really help minor league systems. And I think would be a great point of baseball to become even more international and give players the best of the best at the price they deserve. My final suggestion to improve Major League Baseball was one that a lot of national markets are looking at: expanding to 32 teams. Yes, I understand the idea of expansion is always a very tricky subject, but if we're going to start to bring competitive balance in terms of salaries based on punishing the high end and forcing the low end to meet those salary demands, we have given a lot to players by doing that in increasing payrolls. So what we need to do is we need to give something for the owners to be able to generate their revenue, and this can be done through franchise prices. If you award 2 franchises at high end values, you're talking close to 500, maybe up to even $1 billion in terms of a franchise price, then this would really make a difference in the owners in terms of their profit. You bring 2 teams into that, you expand to 32 teams, 16 teams per league. You have 4 divisions then with 8 teams involved. I think it would really fit well for Major League Baseball. You still keep an American League and a National League because that is tradition in baseball. We go back to 2 divisions. That is something that's happened in baseball in the past. And we have 3 teams from each division making the playoffs. I'm not expanding the playoffs in Major League Baseball anymore. In fact, this would actually cut the back by 2 teams, and you'd only have 12 teams total rather than the 14 we see now. But if you bring this back in, it really puts importance on division play as well. The top seed in each division would get a bye, and the second and third seeds would play a wild card round. 3 games, just like we see right now. The higher seed, the number 2 seed, would host all 3 games and give them the opportunity to expand that way. And we'd have a 3-game best of 3 series at the number 2 seed's ballpark. The winner then would then face the number 1 seed from their division in a best of 5. That takes you into the Championship Series and World Series, which would each be 7 games, as has been in the past. I think this would bring a lot of income into baseball. I think it balances the play out in terms of understanding what payroll commitments need to be made in Major League Baseball on both the low and high end. And I think there's some cities out there that would be excellent candidates to expand Major League Baseball on both the Eastern Front and the Western Front to really improve these types of play in Major League Baseball. If you think Major League Baseball needs to expand and you're looking at some cities, comment down below with a city that you think that Major League Baseball should expand to. I'll take those into consideration, hopefully come up with another video on some of the best cities that Major League Baseball could expand to. I think this is a really terrific idea for Major League Baseball for the future. It would generate a lot of revenue. I think Major League Baseball would be in a really good place to expand, provided they can take care of the Oakland situation. That's the only thing that needs to happen first, to find a city or to rectify the situation in Oakland before you expand. So there's my 5 ideas on how to expand Major League Baseball. I think it's a really improvement for the players, but if you could get expansion, I think it continues to give those profit margins to the owners as well. But forcing those owners to really up the payroll from the lower end to meet a minimum would make a big difference in the competitive balance of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much for making it all the way end to end. Another video here on 3 Up, 3 Down. I greatly appreciate all the support you guys have been showing me. We've crossed the 100 subscriber threshold, which I absolutely am so thrilled to do. We're approaching the next Major League season so quick. It's not very far into spring training. You can expect lots of content, especially at the beginning of the start of the Major League season. So keep it tuned. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you know the videos that are coming up here on 3 Up, 3 Down. As well, if you're interested in this type of content, make sure you go check out my contracts video. Something I spent a lot of time on, a lot of research on. I think it's a terrific video, especially if you're interested in the finances of baseball. Go check that one out. As well, go check out my shorts videos. I've been putting a few more of them out there. Very quick, 1 minute style videos. I think you'll really enjoy them. But until next time, take care, everyone.